Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating, deeply pragmatic strategic theory from our source material. We're going to be unpacking a very specific, historically grounded blueprint for handling high-stakes geopolitics. And the core of this theory? Well, it might completely surprise you, because it is absolutely not about finding a moral hero to save the day. Instead, we're neutrally analyzing how administrations might actually leverage self-interested adversaries to avoid total catastrophe. It's a somewhat chilling look at how history repeats itself, mostly in the shadows. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the Iranian strategic puzzle, move into the Albert Speer concept, check out the Operation Torch blueprint, look at building the quiet wire, and finally wrap up with the least bad option. Let's jump right in. All right, part 1, the Iranian strategic puzzle and setting up the current board. So, picture this highly complex scenario laid out by our source. Imagine the initial military strikes have already hit. The supreme leader is gone, and the Revolutionary Guard has scrambled, installing his son within just 10 days to keep an iron grip on the country. There's a 60-day ticking clock on a newly signed memorandum, and hey, oil is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz again. But here's the massive catch. The ultimate prize, that giant stockpile of enriched uranium, is still buried deep underground beneath cratered sites. Plus, you've got global powers like China and Russia throwing their unwavering support behind the regime. So if you're on the inside, your ship doesn't exactly feel like it's sinking just yet, right? Now, here is the absolute crucial point. To defuse this incredibly tense situation, the source argues that the administration is not hunting for a moderate. They aren't looking for a defector who suddenly grew a moral conscience, no. They are hunting for a very specific type of operative inside the regime who actually has the keys and the authority to just hand over that uranium and let inspectors prove it's gone. Which brings us to Section 2, the Albert Speer concept and the survival instinct. To figure out exactly what kind of psychological profile we're talking about, our source takes us on a quick trip back to World War II, specifically looking at a guy named Albert Speer. Speer was a close confidant and the chief architect for Adolf Hitler. Cut to 1945, the war is basically over, and Hitler issues the infamous Nero Doctrine. This was a literal scorched earth order to burn down all German infrastructure, factories, supply lines, everything, just out of pure spite so the advancing Western forces couldn't capture anything. And Speer? He was the man ordered to push the button. But here's where it gets really interesting. Speer knew the war was lost. He was doing the cold, hard math on his own personal survival. So when he got this devastating order, he didn't throw some heroic public rebellion. He just feigned obedience. He effectively said, "Yes, sir, I will," and then quietly proceeded to do the exact opposite. He made himself an intentional roadblock. And you know what? Because he played it that way, he actually managed to escape the hangman's noose at the Nuremberg trials. It's a perfect illustration of the source's main theory. When a regime is teetering on the brink, you are not looking for a moral hero. You are hunting for a modern-day Speer. You're looking for a totally self-interested bad actor who looks at the writing on the wall, crunches the numbers, and simply decides, "I want to survive this collapse." Moving right along to Section 3, the Operation Torch blueprint, a precedent from 1942. Our source digs into this wild, miniature spy thriller from 1942 to show us how this actually works as an executable military strategy. Picture this. 18 months before 100,000 Allied troops land on the beaches of North Africa, the State Department sets up this genius cover story about managing a grocery shipment. Under that cover, they deploy 12 amateur spies. They called them the Apostles. We're talking guys like wine merchants, lawyers, and even a Coca-Cola salesman. Their real mission? To quietly mingle with the French officer corps and take their temperature, figuring out exactly who might flip when the invasion arrived, all to prevent a massive bloodbath on the beaches. And this highlights the ultimate dilemma the Allies faced. They actually had this textbook perfect hero lined up, General Henri Giraud. The guy was totally clean, incredibly brave, literally smuggled in by a submarine. But when he told the troops to stand down, they completely ignored him. He just didn't have the real authority. On the flip side, you had Admiral François Darlan. Now, Darlan was a detestable Vichy collaborator who had publicly praised Nazi Germany. But he was the commander-in-chief. He was literally the only guy whose word the troops would actually obey. So despite absolute outrage back home from the press for cutting a deal with a pro-Nazi collaborator, General Eisenhower essentially held his nose and recognized Darlan's authority just so he would order the guns down. The source includes this incredibly blunt justification from Roosevelt and Churchill. They basically said, look, we're not here to reward a good man. We are here to stop the shooting. It is literally a masterclass in wartime pragmatism. The clean insider didn't have the power, and the powerful insider wasn't clean. That brings us to Section 4, building the quiet wire, the invisible channel. So, bringing this whole historical blueprint back to our modern Iranian scenario, how do you actually execute this and find that modern-day Darlan? Well, you obviously can't go stand at a podium and announce you're shopping for a trader, right? That's just going to get people killed. Instead, as the source explains, you have to build an invisible channel, a quiet wire, way before the crisis peaks. You rely on third-party back channels. Think the Israelis, Qataris, or Omanis. Through them, you offer private, highly specific assurances. You guarantee the guy survives, you protect his family and his wealth, and you even hand him the perfect PR spin. He gets to be framed as the savior of Iran. But the source gives a massive warning here. If you wait too long to build this channel, the regime will just use that 60-day clock to hunt down their own wavering guys and eliminate them. If nobody on the inside believes there's a safe lifeboat waiting for them, you end up with what the source calls a North Korea ending. That is a terrifying scenario where the only people left in the room are absolute, unwavering hardliners, simply because all the pragmatists who might have cut a deal have already been purged. To avoid that nightmare, the analysis says the administration has to run two totally opposite strategies at the exact same time. First, you have visible pressure. We're talking hard, unrelenting military and economic force. The whole point here is psychological. Make the insider realize the ship is definitively sinking. But right alongside that, you need the invisible wire, those quiet back channels offering a credible lifeboat. The pressure forces them to want to jump ship, and the wire gives them a safe place to land. Finally, Section 5, the least bad option and the true cost of failure. So, why is this incredibly controversial, morally gray strategy even necessary? Well, the source argues you have to look at the alternative. If you don't find a self-interested collaborator, your only other option is using brute, sustained military force to try and dig through that buried uranium. And that kicks off a cascade of global disasters. We're talking shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, immediate and massive panic in the global oil markets, and triggering the biggest emergency release of oil reserves in history. And the real kicker, after all that destruction and economic fallout, you still have absolutely zero guarantee you actually found every last bit of that hidden uranium stockpile. The ultimate takeaway from our source today is that this Speer strategy isn't some optimistic Hollywood movie where a good guy saves the day. It is simply the least bad option on the table. The people who save countries at the 11th hour, they're rarely heroes. They're usually just survivors who wake up on a random Tuesday, do the math, and decide they'd rather be remembered as the guy who stopped the shooting rather than the guy who went down with the sinking ship. It's a really chilling, deeply pragmatic theory applied to a modern crisis. And it forces us to strip away our rose-tinted glasses and look at the raw mechanics of geopolitics. Which leaves us with this final, heavy question from today's explainer. When the stakes are literally global economic collapse or nuclear proliferation, is making a deal with a self-interested, totally unsavory adversary not just an option, but the actual, only realistic way out? It's a tough one, but history strongly suggests we're going to have to answer it again. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the strategies behind the headlines.